Thank you for watching the Touring News Daily October 3rd broadcast. It contains information I found to be important over the last 24 hours. If you enjoy the content, share, like, subscribe, and check out my live show at twitch.tv/touringnews. All sources will be provided in chronological order in the video description below. The first story. Hong Kong authorities consider using emergency regulation ordinance to ban face masks. Hong Kong officials discussed using emergency legislation dating from the colonial era to invoke the measure. The legislation, called the Emergency Regulations Ordinance, last used during the 1967 riots, would be used to ban face masks at public gatherings. The law was first passed by the British government to put down a seaman strike in Hong Kong Harbour in 1922. Its only other use was by the colonial administration to assist putting down riots that hit Hong Kong in 1967. The face mask ban is expected to be announced on Friday after a meeting of the Executive Council in which emergency laws are likely to be enacted, local TV channel TVB reported. If passed, the laws would grant Chief Executive of Hong Kong, Carrie Lam, the authority to, quote, make any regulations whatsoever which he or she may consider desirable in the public interest in case of emergency or public danger. The sources were BBC and Bloomberg. The second story. Slovenian government passes legislation allowing government to seize some national air routes. The changes were passed at a government session on Thursday, October 3rd, 2019. 4 days prior, Slovenia's Adria Airways, owned by the German investment firm 4K Invest, filed for bankruptcy. This left the country with no Slovenian-based airline. The proposed legislation requires confirmation by Parliament in the coming months. From Reuters.com. Irish Foreign Minister Simon Coveney speaks about Brexit. In response to Boris Johnson's speeches in Manchester on October 2nd, 2019, Simon Coveney told Parliament, quote, my judgment is that Boris Johnson does not want a deal and that the paper that was published yesterday was an effort to move us in the direction of a deal, but if that is the final proposal, there will be no deal. There are a number of fundamental problems with that proposal, but I think it is also true to say there is a progression towards the space we need to be in other elements of the proposal. Two significant problems with the proposal were discussed. One being the lack of indication of how border customs issues can be avoided, and second, it remains unclear if the proposals would give Northern Ireland's Democratic Unionist Party an effective veto. Quote, we cannot support any proposal that suggests that one party or indeed a minority in Northern Ireland could make the decisions for the majority, he said. According to two people familiar with the matter, Prime Minister Boris Johnson hasn't ruled out keeping the contentious backstop agreement for the Irish border, with one crucial condition, that the EU puts a clear time limit on it. The so-called backstop is a set of arrangements designed to ensure that there are never any checks on goods crossing the border between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. It's supposed to remain in place until a more permanent system can be introduced in the years after Brexit. Johnson wants to abolish the backstop because it would keep the United Kingdom tied to the EU's custom regime indefinitely and prevent his government seeking trade deals. In a story from Indonesia, 11,500 people are evacuated from Wamena, Indonesia due to violence. Protests and unrest have risen since late August after Papuan students in Surabaya, Indonesia were taunted and attacked in a confrontation over racial epithets and accusations of desecrating a national flag. During clashes on September 23rd, 33 people died and many were injured. Homes and government offices were burned down, while 250 motorcycles and cars were destroyed. From the 23rd of September to the 2nd of October, Indonesian air forces flew 7,467 people out of Wamena, while 4,179 people left on commercial flights. These statistics come from Harry Hikmat, an official at Indonesia's social ministry. Papuan spokesman Ahmad Mustafa Kamal said the situation in Waman is now stable and that shops and markets are open once again. A very short story. A longtime police employee attacked and killed at least 4 people inside Paris police headquarters. This is the end of that story. Iraqi Prime Minister Adil Abd al-Mahdi announced a curfew in Baghdad on Thursday and closed 2 border crossings with Iran after widespread protests throughout the country. Similar regulations were implemented on Wednesday in Al-Amara, Nasiriyah, and Hela. In addition to these restrictions, the two border crossings, Khosravi and Shahzaba, with Iran have been closed. These are close to the holy Shiite sites where Iranian pilgrims often visit. Across 3 days of demonstrations with Iraq, the death toll of protests has risen to 19. Reportedly, up to 400 people have been wounded. The violence has come just days before the Shiite pilgrimage of Arba'in, when around 20 million worshippers are expected to journey across southern Iraq on foot for days in the largest annual gathering in the world. Baghdad's high-security green zone was targeted by 2 rockets, one landing near the embassy of Turkey and another hitting a nearby bridge. People are correlating the beginning of the protests with the removal of popular commander of counterterrorism forces, Lieutenant General Abdul Wahab al-Sahadi, from his post. Reports say Iraq has cut off social media access in most parts of the country except in Iraqi Kurdistan. Sources are listed as follows. To news about Facebook. Facebook can be ordered to police and remove illegal content worldwide, ruled on by Europe's top court. This ruling comes 1 week after the same court told Google it does not have to apply to Europe's, quote, right to be forgotten, quote, law globally. The EU right to be forgotten states, the correspondingly named rule primarily regulates erasure obligations. According to this, personal data must be erased immediately where the data are no longer needed for their original processing purpose, or the data subject has been withdrawn his consent and there is no other legal ground for processing. The data subject has objected and there are no overriding legitimate grounds for the processing, or erasure is required to fulfill a statutory obligation under the EU law or the right of member states. In addition, data must naturally be erased if the processing itself was against the law in the first place. The controller is therefore, on the one hand, automatically subject to statutory erasure obligations and must, on the other hand, comply with the data subject's right to erasure. The law does not describe how the data must be erased in individual cases. The decisive element is that as a result, it is no longer possible to discern personal data without disproportionate effort. It is sufficient if the data media has been physically destroyed or if the data is permanently overwritten using special software. The judgment by the Luxembourg-based Court of Justice of the European Union said Facebook may have to comply with certain requests to take down content globally under certain conditions. Quote, EU law does not preclude a host provider like Facebook from being ordered to remove identical and, in certain circumstances, equivalent comments previously declared to be illegal, end quote, the court said in a statement. New quote, in addition, EU law does not preclude such an injunction from producing effects worldwide within the framework of the relevant international law. Facebook released a statement saying, quote, it undermines the long-standing principle that one country does not have the right to impose its laws on speech on another country. It also opens the door to obligations being imposed on internet companies to proactively monitor content and then interpret if it is within quotes equivalent out of quotes still in to content that has been found to be illegal. End. In order to get this right, national courts will have to set out very clear definitions of what identical and equivalent means in practice. We hope the courts take a proportionate and measured approach to avoid having a chilling effect on the freedom of expression. Executive Director of Facebook Thomas Hughes said, quote, compelling social media platforms like Facebook to automatically remove posts regardless of their context will infringe our right to free speech and restrict the information we see online. End. Beginning. This would set a dangerous precedent where the courts of one country can control what the internet users in another country can see. This could be open to abuse, particularly by regimes with weak human rights records. The European Commission said the ruling was limited to court orders and doesn't concern any other forms of notice by users alleging that certain content is illegal. Exxon body cameras boost encryption. Body 3 camera from Exxon has introduced additional security by rendering captured footage inaccessible for playback, download, or edit by default without a form of authentication such as a password. They hope this will assist the authenticity of footage from police body cameras and combat against deep fakes. Other new features include attaching a secure digital signature to videos to help track their provenance. Exxon declined comment about how the new tech will be implemented. United States Senators Mark Warner and Marco Rubio said, quote, the threat of deepfakes is real, quote, in letters to YouTube, Facebook, and 9 other online service providers. The United States and India work toward a trade deal. United States Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross, as shown here, said, quote, "All that we are looking for is to level the playing field," end quote, during an interview at the India Economic Summit in New Delhi, citing lack of reciprocal market access. The United States removed India this year from the Generalized System of Preferences program that allowed duty-free entry for up to $5.6 billion worth of its annual exports to America. New Delhi responded with higher retaliatory tariffs on 28 U.S. products, including almonds, apples, and walnuts. Ross will hold a one-on-one meeting with his Indian counterpart, Piyush Goyal, later today. This is a currently developing story that I did not have enough time to fully cover. I am only giving a very brief synopsis prior to the speech that was delivered. United States President Donald Trump unveiled and signed an executive order today aimed at strengthening the Medicare health program for seniors by seeking to improve its fiscal position and offer more affordable plan options. This follows measures put in place by the Trump administration designed to curtail drug prices and correct other perceived problems with U.S. healthcare. The order pushes for Medicare to use more medical telehealth services, which is care delivered by phone or digital means. The order directs the government to work to allow private insurers who operate Medicare Advantage plans to use new pricing plan methods. Here is a video of the signature.
Okay. Should I do it? Yeah! I'll do it. All right.
The executive order has been signed into action. Upcoming Supreme Court cases of merit. The 9 justices on Tuesday, October 8, 2019, will hear their first major case, Bostock v. Clayton County, on whether gay and transgender people are protected by a landmark federal civil rights law that bars employment discrimination. On the 12th of November, they will weigh the legality of Trump's move to end a program created by his predecessor, Barack Obama, that protects from deportation hundreds of thousands of immigrants who were brought into the United States illegally as children when they hear Trump v. NAACP. The court has arguments scheduled for December 2nd in the first major gun rights case in a decade, although the justices potentially could dismiss it because the New York City law being challenged by gun rights advocates has been amended since the litigation began, when they hear New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus the City of New York. North Korea said on Thursday it had successfully test-fired a new submarine-launched ballistic missile from the sea to contain external threats and bolster self-defense ahead of fresh nuclear talks with the United States. The launch on Wednesday was the most provocative by North Korea since it resumed dialogue with the United States in 2018, and a reminder by Pyongyang of the weapons capability it has been aggressively developing, including intercontinental ballistic missiles, analysts had said. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un sent warm congratulations to the defense scientists who conducted the test, state news agency KCNA said, indicating he did not attend the launch as he has at previous tests of new weapon systems. The new type of SLBM, called Pukguksong-3, was, quote, fired in vertical mode, quote, in the waters off the eastern city of Wonsan, KCNA said, confirming an assessment by South Korea's military on Wednesday that the missile was launched on a lofted trajectory. Quote, the successful new type of SLBM test firing comes to be of great significance as it ushered in a new phase in containing the outside forces' threat to the DPRK and further bolstering its military muscle for self-defense, KCNA said. North Korea rejects the United Nations Security Council resolutions that ban Pyongyang from using ballistic missile technology, saying they are an infringement on its right to self-defense. North Korea fired the missile hours after announcing it would resume talks with the United States by holding working-level negotiations on the 5th of October. On Wednesday, South Korea's military said the missile flew 280 miles or 450 kilometers and reached an altitude of 565 miles or 910 kilometers. It was likely a Pukguksong-class weapon, as the North's earlier submarine-launched ballistic missiles under development were known. United States European tariffs. The products listed have been hit with a tariff: French wine, Italian cheese, single malt Scotch whiskey, cookies, salami, butter, German camera parts, United Kingdom blankets, French and Spanish olives, EU-produced pork sausage, German coffee, Italian fruits, clams, and yogurt, industrial microwave ovens, printed books, sweet biscuits, waffles. The Specialty Food Association said the tariffs would affect 14,000 United States specialty food retailers and over 20,000 other food retailers. The main target of the U.S. tariffs is Airbus aircraft made in the European Union, which face 10% levy that could hurt U.S. airliners such as Delta that have billions of dollars of Airbus orders waiting to be filled. EU products winning reprieves include chocolate, Greek, French, and Portuguese olive oil, helicopters, frozen fish, lobsters, sparkling wine, stemwares, and tiles. In a related article, an Airbus and Boeing trade war. The World Trade Organization has found the world's two largest plane makers received billions of dollars of unfair subsidies in a pair of cases dating back to 2004 and is expected to allow both sides to impose tariffs, starting with the United States. Alabama aerospace workers won an unexpected reprieve from escalating trade tensions on Wednesday when the United States spared an Airbus plant in the state from the impact of tariffs against the European plane maker, at least for now. While Airbus aircraft built in Europe will be hit with a tariff of 10% after World Trade Organization allowed Washington to impose sanctions on EU goods, semi-finished fuselages and wings are exempted, an official list showed. That means large parts shipped to the deep-sea Alabama port of Mobile from plants in Europe will not be hit by the duties, allowing Airbus to continue to supply U.S.-based airlines with a limited number of locally assembled aircraft. A United States committee seeks to interview Boeing engineer on the safety of the 737 MAX aircraft. A U.S. panel has asked Boeing to make an engineer available for an interview after reports that the worker filed an internal ethics complaint on the 737 MAX's safety and that the plane maker convinced the regulator to relax safety standards. The engineer said in a complaint filed this year that during the development of the 737 MAX, Boeing had rejected a safety system to minimize costs. The engineer who worked on cockpit instruments and controls felt the safety system could have reduced risks that contributed to two fatal crashes that killed 346 people in Ethiopia and Indonesia, according to the report. Quote, "All of this information is critical to have as we prepare for our committee's October 30th hearing with Boeing's CEO, as well as Boeing's chief engineer of its commercial airplanes division and the chief pilot for the 737, said Peter DeFazio, chairman of the U.S. House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. News from Walmart. Walmart to test programs for U.S. workers to cut its healthcare costs. Walmart said on Thursday it will begin several healthcare pilot programs for its United States employees starting January 1st as it looks for ways to cut healthcare costs. A program in parts of Arkansas, Florida, and Texas will pilot a program connecting patients with local doctors. A concierge service will be tested in North and South Carolina to address issues with billing, fix appointments, understand a diagnosis, and finding a provider. In Colorado, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, Walmart will expand a program that allows patients to video chat with a doctor from home for $4 per chat. Nationwide, the retailer will offer workers access to fitness clubs for $9 per biweekly pay period and add a predictable copay of $35 for every visit to a primary care physician under its most popular medical plan. Walmart said it is expanding an education program it began last year by offering healthcare degrees aimed at filling critical roles at its more than 5,000 retail pharmacies. A deal was signed with Anthem last year to attract more Medicare enrollees to buy over-the-counter medicines. A facility was opened in Georgia to offer low-priced health services, including dental, x-rays, and mental health counseling. Elizabeth Warren to introduce plan boosting worker protections and strengthening unions. These are a few excerpts from the plan, but only a very few of them. The percentage of unionized workers has plummeted from roughly 35% to just over 10% since the 1950s, leaving too many workers without a strong voice in the workplace. The 5 main goals are as follows: extending labor rights to all workers, strengthening organizing, collective bargaining, and the right to strike, rising wages and protecting pensions, increasing worker choice and control, expanding worker protections, combating discrimination, and improving enforcement. I had planned to cover more of this policy in the video, but have chosen to make a separate one from it, and this will be moving on to the next topic. Chevron versus Exxon in the Permian Basin. United States oil company Chevron is turning to joint ventures and drilling alliances in its bid to dominate the Permian Basin after abandoning a takeover that would have made it the leading producer in the world's biggest shale field. It is now in a race with ExxonMobil to be the first to pump 1 million barrels of shale oil in a day from the field in the United States Southwest, using a strategy that depends on a host of partners sharing their expertise and their output. Shale drilling has helped the United States reverse decades of declines in output to become the world's largest oil producer, and all the major United States oil companies have jumped on the shale bandwagon to boost their own production. Unlike conventional oil fields, however, shale wells decline quickly, producing most of their oil in the first few years, so fields such as the Permian Basin require constant and costly drilling just to keep production steady. Uber offers helicopter transport to and from JFK Airport in New York City. Uber Copter was offered on Thursday, saying flights to and from Lower Manhattan will be available to all users October 7th. The roughly 8-minute flight will cost between $200 and $225 per person and include ground transportation on either side of the trip. Passengers can bring along a small suitcase and have to watch a safety video before takeoff, similar to that of an airplane. Uber's prices roughly compare to those of its competitors, including Blade, which offers a $195 trip to JFK from Manhattan. Those services do not offer ground transportation to the final destination, however. Longtime United States diplomat Kurt Volker, who served as President Donald Trump's special envoy for Ukraine, will give his story behind closed doors to congressional committee staff today. This is the end of that story. In leaked audio from The Verge, Mark Zuckerberg discusses his thoughts on what an Elizabeth Warren presidency would mean. Here is the audio.
The Verge published leaked audio from a July meeting between Zuckerberg and employees. He's heard candidly discussing a range of topics, from the company's competition to its social responsibility, but he also singles out Democratic presidential candidate Elizabeth Warren, blasting her plan to break up Facebook and other big tech companies.
If she gets elected president, then I would bet that we will have a legal challenge, and I would bet that we will win the legal challenge. Does that still suck for us? Yeah. I mean, I don't have to, have a major lawsuit against our own government. I mean, that's not like the position that you want to be in. But look, at the end of the day, if someone's going to try to threaten something that existential, you go to the mat and you fight.
Warren responded by tweeting, "What would really suck is if we don't fix a corrupt system that lets giant companies like Facebook engage in illegal anti-competitive practices, stomp on consumer privacy rights, and repeatedly fumble their responsibility to protect our democracy."
That is the end of the back and forth, to my knowledge, between Mark Zuckerberg and Elizabeth Warren at the moment. And that is also the end of that story. Edward Snowden, the Young Turks interview. Cenk Unger asks, could the government find out all the things people are looking up online? And this is the reply from Edward Snowden.
All right. So, last question, Edward. Just for a layman to understand, could the government find out all the things that people are looking online at? I know it's a funny question, but it's the thing that probably most people are concerned about, and I want people to be able to know, in your estimation, what the answer is.
Yeah. So I just read an article that was a nice little summary of some of the things that we learned in 2013 from one of the country's most prominent professors of cryptography at Johns Hopkins University. His name is Matthew Green. It was a nice little trip down memory lane for me, because the most essential thing, if you remember anything about 2013, what it was about, and one of the key stories in Permanent Record, which is, yes, a memoir of my life, but more broadly, this change in technology, in surveillance, and unfortunately, the character and values of the U.S. intelligence community in the wake of 9/11, is they shifted from what historically had been targeted surveillance, right? They go, we believe this phone line or this satellite truck or this building is associated with, you know, the third Russian rocket division, you know, or the second People's Liberation Army in, you know, China, or Ministry of State Security unit, or it's Osama bin Laden's, right? They had a specific person in mind when they were going after this, and there was a specific operation to go after a specific flow of communications. The advance of technology and the rise of the sort of corporate and competitive internet of the modern day, rather than the cooperative and creative internet of the 1990s and previous era, meant that now, instead of watching certain people, because that's all they could do because it was expensive and difficult, now they could try to watch everyone, everywhere, all the time. This is mass surveillance. The government euphemizes it as bulk collection. If you ever hear the words bulk collection, it just means mass surveillance. And what this means is, and this is covered in great detail in the book if people are interested in it, the government doesn't have to spy on you to intercept your communications, because they're getting everyone's communications. When you have a phone and it's screaming out in the air, right? It's constantly all those nice things that you like. Think about how it is that they get to your phone. Think about how it is when someone dials your phone number, only your phone rings, no other phones in the world rings. How does that work, right? The phone network has to know where every phone is at all times, and which ones have which numbers in order to make them ring. When you request something, you know, from Facebook, from YouTube, this traffic stream, this video that you're watching right now has to go out to a server. Your phone says, can anyone get me this? And a lot of middlemen have to go say, does anyone have this thing that someone's requesting? And then eventually it gets to the server. The server says, I have this file, and then it gets passed all the way back over the internet. All of those middlemen, any one of them, can make a note of that. And they can either hold on to that as long as they want, or they can go, oh, it's not important, I'm going to toss it away. It used to be that these records aged off. The things that we did online were forgotten because there was seen to be no value in them, and they took up space. They were clutter. Now, whether it's Google, whether it's Facebook, whether it's the NSA, right, whether it's North Korea, whether it's China, Russia, Iran, whoever you don't like, they can hold on to this data for basically as long as they want. And increasingly, as technology makes storage more and more capable, the length of time for which these records are held approaches something close to forever. Again, remember, AT&T is holding phone records for all of their customers going back to 1987. This kind of data, not what you said in the call, but the fact that you made the call, when the call happened, who you called, where you called them from. This is called metadata, which means data about data, but you can think of it more clearly as activity records. Not the content of the call, the fact that it happened, not the article that you retrieved from a website, but the fact that you connected to that website from this place using that phone at this time. And if you know what kind of websites people are connecting to, if you know someone, for example, watches the Young Turks, you can infer a lot about their politics. But this metadata is incredibly tiny. It's very easy to store. It's very easy to process by machines. And this is what's so toxic about this change towards mass surveillance from targeted surveillance. The content of communications, which under US law has more legal protections, is less interesting today to intelligence services than the metadata and your activity records, right?
I apologize for the ads that have now played across the top. That is going to be the end of the listening in to the Edward Snowden conversation. To hear the rest of the interview, you can find it at the Young Turks. Let me recalibrate here for a quick moment. And moving on to the next story. President Donald Trump's statements about the Bidens with China. Quote, China should start an investigation into the Bidens, Trump told reporters Thursday as he left the White House. Quote, because what happened in China was just about as bad as what happened with Ukraine. This is from Bloomberg News. And the final piece for today. Amazon plans an $800 million data center in Argentina. The Seattle-based company is preparing to invest about $800 million into the project over 10 years and will reap considerable tax benefits by locating the data center in the Bahia Blanca, Coronel, Rosales districts of the province of Buenos Aires. Amazon, like any company benefiting from the new knowledge economy law, will receive export tax breaks and income tax reduction from 35% to 15% and will effectively pay lower labor costs. Moreover, by locating in the free trade zone, Amazon will pay no national or provincial taxes on energy consumption, a generous benefit for a data center. Thank you for tuning in to the Touring News Daily broadcast on October 3rd, 2019. If you've enjoyed any of the content, please hit the like and subscribe button and share it with your friends. And if you'd like to see the behind-the-scenes looks at how I produce the news each day, check me out at twitch.tv/touringnews. Thank you very much. Have a nice day and be well.